Um, I'm going to try to talk for about 30 minutes to develop some ideas and to develop a history. That's going to be helpful for a conversation. I think the key for me for this conversation, it's a conversation. I wish we were not sitting like we are now. I wish we were sitting around the fire. And I would like you to imagine that you are sitting around the fire. And somebody started conversation, and then you talk, and then somebody listens. And then somebody asks questions, and we go on, and we just go around, and we explore. So let me start with apologies first. The first thing I'm not going to do, I'm not going to tell you or anyone in this room how to lead. And you will see that in the framework or philosophy that I'm going to share with you, because I don't think you can teach leadership. That's to start with. I think similar to what the Catholic Church and other churches, other religions should do, I should also profusely apologize for my missteps in the leadership journey that I've gone through. And apologize to those I might have harmed, because when you get given the responsibility like I have been, it's an enormous responsibility. So you should take it seriously. So I want to apologize to anyone I might have had in my own leadership journey. Okay, with those apologies, let me start with a random ideas, okay? The first one, okay? Most of my thoughts or ideas are based on an experience I had about 20 years ago. I was experiencing a sense of directionless and not knowing my reason to exist. And then I went to, I called a friend of mine, Mike Friedman. And he lived in Cape Town. I think he's now in Durban. Mike Friedman is a paraplegic from here. And I went to him and I said, Michael, why are you so happy? How does that make sense that you can be this happy? Because you've got all these disadvantages against you. And then he introduced me to some thoughts which are centered around a group called the books that I had to read. Then he asked me to read, where one was Leadership and Self-Deception, and the second one he asked me later when it was introduced was The Anatomy of Peace. And then from that I could understand where you come from. And the recent book I've just read it's a book by Pete Laban. I've attended some of his training workshops. It's called Leadership with Humanity. So my framework of thinking and reflecting is going to be based on that. Okay? And that's based, and then I think you also need to take into consideration the fact that there are more than 7 million books which are written about leadership. I think today alone, there's probably 7 million workshops and business school courses being attended today about leadership. Leadership is probably one of the things or topics that are being addressed. I can't think of any other one other than perhaps religion. But compared to religion and all its benefits and what it has done and harmed humanity, I think the return on investment on leadership, training, workshops, books, and based on what I've read, it's less than 2%. So I therefore wonder why some of you would sit here and listen to a topic which is going to give you a return on investment which is less than 2%. Because the essence of leadership as we know it, and as it has been practiced through the entire industrial age setup, has been to say, see what we're doing, do what we're telling you to do, and then you get what you want to do. But I want to make a provocative statement, okay? This is the first one, okay, that I would like anyone in the room to question me about, okay? The first one, based on my experience, is that leadership cannot be taught. You can't teach leadership. And when I just want to, what's the word? Supplement that with, but you can learn leadership. And you can only learn it from experience. And that those experiences are made of bitter and as well as sweet experiences. So I think that's my opening in terms of what I want to share with you. In terms of my own journey, I come from a rural town called Tsala in the Eastern Cape. You will probably not find it in the map if you're looking for it. It's somewhere between, when you're coming from Queenstown, which is now not even called Queenstown, it's called Komani. And then you go 30 kilometers from Tsala, from Queenstown, you go past Ladefred, which is not called Ladefred anymore. It's called Tsakadu. And then you come to Tsala. And if you pass Tsala, which you will, because if you blink, you will miss it. You will go to a place that was called Elliot, which is not called Elliot now. I think it's called Echo or something else. So if you're going to try to position my mind and where I come from, you're going to miss it because that history is lost. And part of that history also is lost in the sense of how people committed to education, how communities committed to that. And in my particular clan status, we were the designated headsmen of our villages, about 8 of them. We were, I'm saying, until now, because we've got a new headman who's not of my clan, and some to take up a position of being a headman. And I'm still thinking about that. So I come from that environment, an environment rooted in conversations around a fire, around a crowd, conversations rooted in deep language, the meaning of language. Like when you say one thing, it means about 4 different things. And then you need to explain what you are saying. And people, you will sit and you will say something, you explain it in detail, and then people will say, Kanti utini kajin. And that means, Kajin, what are you saying? And you said everything you wanted to say, but they will say to you, what are you saying? Because people wanted to understand the depth and the deepness of your, not what you are just saying, but what's in your heart and what you mean. So from those experiences, for me, what I learned is that thinking and influencing, inspiring, it's not about doing. It's not what you do. It's who you are. It's your essence. It's your being. In other words, you don't go to work and then you turn on your leadership switch and now you are a leader. You are a leader from the moment you are born. When you are born, those of us who were children will know a couple of seconds later, one of the reasons or ways of determining life, it's a child crying, and the child cries, and when the child cries, the child leads, because everybody else does what the child wants to be done from that day. So in essence, leadership, while I'm saying, and I'm being provocative about this, while I'm saying it cannot be taught, I'm saying leadership, all of us are ingrained and we are born with leadership. If you are not born with leadership, you will not exist for longer than, I would say, about 4 minutes from the time of your birth. So all of us are ingrained with leadership. But it's one of those things like love, like religion, the purposes that we want to have in life, that we read about and we want to learn about. So the second point I just want to make, also I think hopefully it's provocative to encourage conversation. And let me define what I mean and what my understanding of what leadership is. Leadership is influencing others to voluntarily follow you. Leadership is influencing others to voluntarily follow you. Leadership is not management. Managers are not leaders. Leaders are leaders. Managers manage organizations. Managers manage projects. Leaders commit and connect people to a cause, a common cause that everyone wants to be a part of. Okay. In other words, leadership is being human. Management is doing. So leadership is being a human being, and management is being a human doing. And since some of you might be in this room as CEOs or as aspiring, whatever you call that thing, okay. I think most of us have got an understanding what the term CEO means, Chief Executive Officer. The chief part is always easy to understand. And the O part, which is the officer, is always also easy to understand. But the middle one, which is the E, is the most difficult one to understand. Because Chief Executive Officer also means, in terms of how we've gone in the last stages of our revolutions, industrial as well, is chief also means chief extortion officer. That's what we know. From slavery to where we are now, colonialism and everything else. Chief executive officer also means chief extraction officer. from the industrial age from which we are all coming from. But chief executive officer can also mean chief enabling officer. It can also mean chief energizing officer. And I'm hoping that we can see more of this going into the future. A setup where the chief is not sitting up at the top as in your command structure that we all know about armies and running countries. But the chief executive officer is a mom at home who's looking after the children. It's the child who's heading up, a child headed home, who's doing matric and passing with distinctions and looking after those children. It's the priest who's doing what they were supposedly ordained to do. The chief, in this essence, is all of us. And it's not someone who sits somewhere at the top. It's someone who sits as part of a network of people who are committed to a certain common cause. So, in terms of what I want to share with you, in my own experiences, okay, and what I can reflect on from childhood, and you can also ask yourselves the same questions. Okay, who is the teacher that you remember? From sub-8, for those of us who are at my age, 56 years old, who is the teacher that you remember? Was that the best teacher? Who is the leader that you've come across in your life or people you work with? Was that the most intelligent, the one who came with the best ideas that you can ever imagine? It wasn't. It was the person who loved you. And therefore, in essence, when I'm saying, okay, leadership is about humanity, and it's about all those things, about your essence. It's not what you do, it's who you are, and who you are, how you relate who you are into the environment and the context in which you operate, and how you define your leadership, and how you set the course for your organization, and all those things. I think those things translate into love. That's my proposition. That's the point I want to make. So back to you, Luni.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sitting us around the proverbial sort of fireplace. I definitely felt the warmth, and it's really always good to have these conversations in such an open and transparent and generous manner. So thank you for sharing your story. As you were sharing your story, there are a number of people that were moved and inspired. So just checking some of the comments here, there's a lot of quotes that people got from you, Andile. So thank you for that. There's a huge appreciation around the love piece when it comes to leadership, because I think sometimes that's easily forgotten, that we can indeed and should indeed lead with love. And so I am going to open it up and to hear some of these comments out loud. So if you could kindly unmute yourself, let this be an engagement, a conversation, warmth around the fire, so to speak. And Andile, I'm sure, will comment as well, will continue to comment and add his wisdom as we hear from different people. So if you have questions, we are all ears. Thank you.
Thank you, Lungi. You know, while people are preparing that conversation, okay, let me just add one thing again, which I discovered when I arrived at Penrith. And I asked them a simple question: why are you here? It was a survey that Susanna and I did. I think Susanna arrived at Penrith a month or two before me. And being a journalist and educationist and a trainer, we developed a survey, and we asked people, why are you here? Why are you doing what you're doing? They said it's because we love what we're doing. And the craziest, funniest thing, okay, of all of my experiences, because in my life before, I had never heard somebody saying that. But I didn't find love in what people were doing. And there's not enough love in what we are doing. We've moved the needle sufficiently, I think people will say spectacularly. But that's what people said. There is the reason they are doing what they are doing. And I think people do what they are doing because they love it. Okay. But anyway, I'm open for you. I can't see the questions.
Yes. I'll have a look and monitor the questions. And there's an invitation for us to step into love and to share our stories. And I see we have a hand from Susanna, and then after that, it's Robin and then Nadine. Thank you.
Thank you, Lungile. Good morning, everyone. Susanna Oosthuizen, Andile did mention me now. We do work together. I am one of the recipients of the Leadership with Love from Andile's side. But as he mentioned, also former journalist. So let's see if I can get some difficult question out there for him coming with that hat on. I think you alluded to the fact, Andile, that a lot of people in leadership roles, as we speak of it, are also in roles that have names such as CEO, COO, Managing Director, and there are certain expectations attached to those roles. And perhaps you can just tell us how you marry that concept of leading with love with the demands that these roles sometimes place on people. Especially if you think of the nonprofit sector, where, as you mentioned, people are usually involved in because they want to work for good and want to do good. But we still strive, there's still objectives that have to be achieved. There are funders that have to be listened to, and objectives from that side. And there's still HR practices, there's still disciplinary actions that need to happen, people, contracts to terminate. So just maybe throw some light for us on how you have found it to marry the concept of leading with love with those kind of demands with it, that come with the role.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. Okay, look, the essence of how society is organized now, whether it's government or multinational corporations or NGOs like Penrith, they're organized around what I would call the 4 wicked pillars of bureaucracy. And the first one is IT. Across the board, you find it in the country. We probably have one of the biggest, our resources are put in IT. The second one is human resources. The third one is finance. The fourth one is compliance. And that's how we organize. a society. But that organization of society is based on the industrial age, is not based on where we are as humanity now, or where we should be. And I think as leaders, and that's what we must continuously question ourselves. How are these systems, how is this bureaucracy helping us to achieve what? To achieve efficiency, to reflect and to relate to what I said earlier, extortion or extraction, or is it enabling or is it energizing? So I think those are the fundamental questions we need to ask ourselves. But having said that, it's important, I think anyone who's got a leadership goal or ambition should know that in a leadership is not this way. Leadership is these ways. It's circles, it's a network. So if you want to lead an organization, you need to create that environment where that setup is acceptable and where that setup is works. That you can have the people who deal with IT, the people who deal with human resources, the people who deal with finance, and the people who deal with compliance. But in my view and in my experience, a leader is not the person who does that. A manager is the person who does that. And so to speak, and we are fortunate in our stance, in our situation, that I've never been a manager. I mean, I started managing people when I was 23, but I've never been a manager. I've always been a leader. So I've always had this inclination to find managers, to surround myself with managers, to the extent that I've moved in various, fields quite easily, because I'm not an educationist and I don't have to be an expert in education, but I can sit around the great minds we can find, and then I can question, I can ask the right questions, and I can show what's beyond the mountain, what's beyond the trees, visually, to people to aspire to that. And that's what I think is leadership. Okay, that's how sometimes we mistake leadership and management. Leadership is not about efficiencies. Leadership is about impact. It's about the sustainable impact. It's about inspiring people. But management is about efficiency. And I know because it is truly soul destroying. The management part. The leadership part, it's difficult. At the same time, it's easy because you can always aspire, you can always train and all that stuff. But the manager needs to get the job done. Managers, the organization need to get things done. Sorry, I took too long to answer your question.
No, thank you so much. And I'm seeing more and more hands come up. So this is great. It's really becoming engaging. We've got 4 hands. We'll start with Robin, then Nadine, John, and Struan.
Thank you, Andile. Thank you, Lungile. It's just blissful listening to you, Andile. It's like a wonderful experience of resonance, oasis. Fantastic, thank you. I just wanted to return briefly to this problem or this challenge of language, and the recognition and the kind of the need to develop our shared recognition that language is essential. It's essential for us to bridge and to communicate, but it's also essential for us to be able to move beyond the language to understanding, and we can sometimes get stuck, in trying to communicate with the specifics of the language that we are using, and moving beyond listening to words to listening to meaning is a practice. It's something we need to practice together. And it really requires us opening so many more senses than our auditory receptors and our brain tracts that listen to the language alone. And just an interesting reflection, because this topic of leading with love, of leading for humanity, of leading networks is one that I love. And a lot of our conversations with in various spaces are around this issue of language and the difficulty of language, and specifically the recognition that certain languages find it easier to talk about these topics than others do. So when you talk about, for instance, your purpose or your meaning or your inner being, a lot of words in the Arabic space or in the Latino sort of space actually have space and scope for that. It's well understood, and this language of love is easily used in a business context. But other languages, it's quite tough. So English is not a language that finds it easy to talk about love. It's a very difficult subject to bring into a business context. A lot of Germanic languages also have this difficulty with bringing this topic of love. We have an incredible advantage on our continent because we understand love. And so perhaps, just being able to have that conversation about, we're going to talk about love now. Let's look at it from other linguistic perspectives. Let's really get to the heart beyond the box that we're describing it in. So just a reflection more than a question. Thank you, Andile.
I fully agree with you. I think, some of the simplest and most profound greetings I think most of us would relate to is namaste, and what it means. Just the greeting, okay? And in the African languages that I know, and I know most of them, the one that is even as profound as that is sawubona. Because when you say sawubona, you're one person and you say, we see you. And they are one person, you say, we see you, because I'm part of men. I'm one of men. And we see you. We don't see you as one, we see you as one of men. So that depth of language and culture is really truly critical to the conversations that we and the tools we need to use in conducting these conversations and sharing them. Your point was a comment, and I fully, truly agree with it. And I am not as obvious as I should have, as I should be, especially about some of the cultures that we have, especially in the Arabic Islamic space. And we should have more of that. And I've read some books, about 3 of them, written by people from the Middle East. And I found myself in those books. I found my framework of thinking, my framework of being. And that framework of being, okay, sometimes in the African context, we call it Ubuntu. But I just think maybe the word Ubuntu or even humanity is probably abused, okay? That's why I chose the topic for this discussion, to call it what it is, what I think it is. And I think it is that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for bringing in that contribution, the language piece, to this conversation. We have 3 more hands, and I'm going to see if we can try to honor the time. We only have until 11 o'clock, so if we can just be mindful of the time so that we can give Andile some time to just wrap up at the end. So Nadine, over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Lungi, and thank you, Andile, for a truly profound sharing this morning. I want to take you back a little bit to Susanna's comment, but to bring it down to the level of the person. I think many, if I could say, many of us are forced to be leaders and managers. And you may not be able to provide an answer, but I will ask my question nonetheless. And my question is, what is your advice or guidance to those of us who have to straddle between leading and managing, to straddle between being and doing, because we have no choice? And something that you said earlier, you said managing is soul destroying. And I felt it like a punch to my chest, like that, because it so resonates with me. My own director's in this meeting and she knows this. I have struggled with the management aspect of my work for years. I don't like it. I don't like to do it. I'm good at it, but I hate the fact that I have to do it. And it's soul destroying. I avoid it, but I do it because I have to answer for it and I'm held accountable for it. And so there's a part of me that almost wants to crossly say to you, okay, fine, you're saying you were able to find spaces where you could lead and lead and lead and lead and find people around you to manage, but I don't have that privilege, that wonder. So help me, because I'm not as lucky as you. So that's my challenge to you. And if you have to say to me, find another job, then well, so be it. Thanks so much for a very inspiring conversation.
That's wonderful. Of course, I don't have an answer to your question, because your question is resource-based, principally. But I also think it's about the points I made earlier about how we need to rethink our organization as a challenge. How we rethink the context and the environment in which we are operating, and how we rethink leadership, and how we rethink organizations. To the extent, and Susanna will allude to this if she wants to, but I think we've got limited time. For instance, the person who's effectively now managing human resources at Penrith is our former PA. The person who does IT is a shared service that we share with Penrith College. These tedious things, I think they can be delegated. But you need to understand your own leadership, comfort, your framework, your mathematical thinking about what it means. For instance, at Penrith, I don't even have an office. I sit anywhere where I want, I talk to anywhere I want. But we've got this thing that's made up that there's a CEO's office. You go to the CEO's office, go to the principal's office. So those are some of the things we have had to rethink. That as part of cost cutting, I don't need an office. I can sit anywhere. There's no space at Penrith that is called my space, where people are coming to me as, as something which I'm not. I'm going to them. So Nadine, I'm not sure I've fully answered your question, but I think it's about rethinking leadership. I think about rethinking organizations. The old school industrial way of thinking of someone from the top who is doing all these 100 things and is in charge of those things. It's not going to work for a network system of connecting with people going forward. I think that's the challenge. The challenge is to rethink leadership itself, and we need to rethink and reconfigure organizations, from hierarchical institutions to networked people who are skilled in doing one thing or three things, who don't need to be managers of everything, but that component of the network. So that would be my subject.
Great. Thanks, Andile, for the invitation for all of us to rethink and to reconfigure. We've got two more hands. We've got John and Struan, and then we're going to give the mic back to you, Andile, to close us off.
Andile, thank you for taking us to where we need to be. I want to ask, loving inwardly, loving into the organization is one thing. Loving outward from the organization is another. And, we live in a world where, as Martin Luther King said, love without justice is sentiment, and justice without love is cruelty. And I find myself battling with the narrative outward from the organization, to speak truth to the power of what is imposed from, whether it be funder expectations or whether it be societal absorption of oppression, if you like. So it's the oppressor. So the ability to speak truth to power as a leader seems to me to be less of a focus of conversations in our country, because it's a scary territory. I know you navigate that, but how would you respond to what are the key elements of that?
Thanks, John, for that. I appreciate that. It's a difficult terrain that you are talking about, because especially in our NGO space, we are not only pleasing the donors, we're also pleasing the friends of the donors. And most of the time, the friends of the donors are government. So how do you speak power? How do you speak to power with conviction? And in that essence, in that process, how do you not lose your essence? Your sense of being, which I've said to you, your sense of being as a human being is to love. Because anybody who hates is suffering more than anybody who's doing nothing. Okay, but that's a sidetrack. So how do you do that? It's a difficult call to make. You've got boards to report to, you've got connections to make. But I really think if you want to be a true leader, you can take that position. And I think in our history and in our country, we have people who've done that. The people who led the HIV crusade, AIDS setup, nobody loved them, nobody supported them. And power was mightier than them. But who's mightier now? They have been, I think, for a considerable time. So I think it's about sticking to your convictions. Because if you can stick with your convictions, then you are not only hurting society, but you are also hurting yourself. Because you're not being your true self. You go to work and you do things you hate. I'm sorry I've summarized it I know you're worried about time. But it's a crucial discussion that, John, I think we need to continue to have in these kinds of forums, to say, how do we speak truth to power? And how do we do so while maintaining our convictions, our integrity, our authenticity, and all those kinds of things. But I think I like that conversation, and I think we must have that conversation. If I may please suggest.
Thank you.
Absolutely, and I think the intention with these in the boardroom sessions is for the conversations to continue to flow within our networks. And so whether it's with this platform itself or whether we continue to build on these other networks to continue such conversations, we really, really do encourage it. We've got one more hand, which is Struan.
Hello, thank you, Andile, and thank you, Lungile. I just want to, this is a comment, so I want to propose that the love is, if we go back to the fireside, it's followed the story of humanity from when we were just bands of related people, and slowly but surely the story of love has been an expansion of love, that Steven Pinker puts it, that the better angels of our humanity have contributed to a reduction in violence. And if we look at history, that the suffragettes and the inclusion of women and the civil rights movement and the inclusion of diversity of peoples. So what I want to add is that there's a lovely short phrase, which I think is really important. It comes from Persian Zoroastrianism, where the central creed is good thoughts, good words, good deeds. And I think that's a lovely way to guide love within yourself so that you can express it to others. And yeah, I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
No, I appreciate. Actually, I truly believe in what you just said. Okay, and I mean, the essence of leadership is not what we need to do out there in the world. Because I'm now 56 years old, I now realize my limitations. It's what we need to do inside ourselves. And that's the influence. It's an exponential influence that you can have when you change yourself, when you reframe yourself. You can make an exponential influence. It's not going to be technology. You know, most people are now talking about fourth industrial revolution. It's not going to be technology, okay? The biggest breakthrough of the 21st century is not going to be technology, because technology is past. And we are actually now suffering from it. The biggest breakthrough of the 21st century is going to be humanity. And I would say, and I translate that into one word, which I think, regardless of what religious institution you believe in, I think it relates to love.